Hey there, as a Latter-day Lights listener, I want to give you a very special gift today. My brand new book, Faith to Stay. This book is filled with inspiring stories, powerful discoveries, and even fresh insights to help strengthen your faith during the storms of life. So, if you're looking to be inspired, uplifted, and spiritually recharged, just visit faithtostay.com. Now, let's get back to the show. Hey everyone, I'm Scott Brandley.
And I'm Darla Brandley. Every member of the church has a story to share, one that can instill faith, invite growth, and inspire others.
On today's episode, we're going to hear from US Today's best-selling author, Heather B. Moore, and how she's used perseverance and a lot of prayer to forge a full-time writing career. Welcome to Latter-day Lights. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Latter-day Lights. We're so glad you're here with us today, and we're really excited to introduce our special guest, Heather B. Moore, to the show. Welcome, Heather.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear about some of the books that you've written and kind of your career, how you got to where you are, some of the highs, some of the lows. That'll be exciting. But before we jump into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Heather B. Moore. I always use the B in my name because there's another author, Heather Moore, out there. I currently live in Utah County in Utah, and I have 4 grown children, 1 grandson, and a menagerie of pets. There's quite a few of them around. I've been writing for over 20 years now, and I just have been grateful to be able to write a lot of books for the LDS community, as well as more national-oriented books.
Okay, so you kind of do a mix. And what kind of genre do you typically like to write?
So I mostly write historical fiction. I've written anything from ancient historicals like biblical and Book of Mormon, both Old Testament and New Testament fiction. And I also more modern historical fiction like the Cold War and the 80s. And I also do some contemporary. As far as the LDS market, I've written LDS nonfiction, inspirational nonfiction. And so I kind of just dabble in whatever I find interesting, which is obviously a lot of things.
Okay.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, we're excited to hear about your story and how you got into this. So why don't we turn the time over to you and tell us where your story begins?
Great. I always thought it's kind of an interesting story of how I got started. I was 30 when I first started writing my first book, and I had been helping my grandmother with her personal history. And I was driving up to Salt Lake County about once a week with my kids when they were pretty little and asking her questions and writing up her story and then having her read it and make corrections or changes. And while we were going through this process, I had a story idea that would take place kind of during her era when she grew up, when she was a young mother during World War II era. And I thought, well, I'll just maybe write a short story and submit to magazines. Back then, magazines like Redbook and Good Housekeeping, they would publish novelettes. Mm-hmm. And as I was writing, it just kept getting longer and longer and longer until it was probably close to 300 pages. And I thought, I think I just wrote a book and I don't know what to do with it. Of course, it was horrible. I didn't really know it was horrible yet, but I thought I need to find a publisher for this book. So I went to the Lehigh Library, which is just a really tiny library back then. It's gone through different renovations since then. And I looked up this giant book, and it's called Publishers Marketplace. And it lists the names and addresses of the publishers and what they're looking for. And back then, this is, over 20 years ago, is you had to print out sample chapters and print out your query letter, and then also send a self-addressed stamped envelope to get your rejection. And so I was doing that for, a few months. And then I remember looking up online, and this is, of course, back when we had dial-up internet. And I found the League of Utah Writers, and they had a chapter group in Provo that met at the library down there. And so I started going to that once a month And I just was really fascinated hearing other authors and how they got published. And then there was a group of them that were in a critique group. And I started meeting with this critique group every week. And we would bring our maybe 6 to 8 pages at a time and we'd read through them. And then everyone would go around the table and slash up your chapter and give you feedback, obviously good feedback, but things that you needed to fix. And I felt like I was really going back to college. I thought, this is what I didn't learn in college, but if I want to get a book published, I need to learn this. So I was bringing this first book, and I remember some of the questions they would ask me, like, where are we, Heather? Where are your characters and what are they doing? I'm like, I don't know. They're in a kitchen or they're outside in a tent. And because it just shows you, I just knew nothing about setting a scene and also what is characterization and all these things that you learn in high school, but you just totally forget, right? Once you're out of high school. So I really just learned writing and developing scene and structure from the ground up. And so that first book, I took part of it through my critique group. I was sending it out. No one was interested. So I wrote another book. I wrote a mystery and I finished that mystery. I was taken to critique group. And I remember submitting to a local publisher and they wrote back this very nice rejection letter. So there's kind of like a hierarchy of rejection letters. There's when you don't hear back anything, they just ghost you. And the next step up is when they send a form rejection, which looks like, nowadays we all have our own printers, but back then they were just Xerox copies and you could tell it'd been Xeroxed over and over and over by the time it got to you. And then the next level up is a personal rejection letter, which it would have your name on it. It might be, typed up, kind of customized to what your book was about. So I got a personalized rejection letter and I said, we really like your writing and we're very interested in the story until about page 35. And we realized you had not done your research. And it was kind of like a mystery, like a kidnapping mystery. Starts out with a kidnapping. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm not going to go talk to a cop and ask him questions. Anyway, I just had this kind of mind freeze. I wasn't going to go research what this book needed if I was going to write about police procedure in this story. So I didn't, and I stopped submitting that book. And it sounds kind of strange to spend a couple months, maybe 3 months writing a book and then just kind of give up on it. But that's what I did. And maybe that was part of my learning arc or something. And so I was looking around at the marketplace, and a couple of the members of my critique group were publishing with Covenant Communications or Desert Book. And so they were publishing with other local publishers. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a book specifically for one of those publishers. So I decided to write historical fiction on the Book of Mormon because in my mind, I was thinking, okay, this would be very interesting to kind of research. But yet when it's fictionalized, you have a little bit of leeway. And I feel like it might have a broader audience than what else I was writing. So of course I was just naive and none of that stuff would turn out to be true. But I remember just writing the first chapter and thinking my critique group is going to just be so excited and be so impressed. And there'll be angels singing as I'm reading this. And they'll be like, wow, Heather, this is amazing. Well, none of that happened. They were all dead silent. And then finally one of them said, there's another Book of Mormon series out there. And I just had no idea. Because when I went to the LDS bookstores in Utah, I would, buying a baptism gift or something. I wasn't there necessarily looking for my fictional reads. And then one lady in the critique group just said, well, this is a lot different and you should keep writing it because I've read the other series and it has a different starting point, a different, kind of family it follows. And so my series I had started writing was Nephi was the main character. And then, of course, other members of his family weren't there. So I finished the book and I submitted to Desert Book and they sent me I think the rejection letter was kind of the middle tier one. It wasn't totally, well, I guess it was personalized because it did say, we will never and I felt like the never was bolded, but maybe it wasn't bolded, but it felt bolded to me. Published scripture fiction, or I think it said Book of Mormon fiction. And I said, okay, so strike one, right? So then I submitted to Covenant Communications next. But the only thing is Covenant had published this other Book of Mormon series. So I was a little bit iffy thinking with this other series, if there's more books coming out, they may not be interested in mine. But I submitted anyway. And a few months later, they wrote back and they said that I didn't have Lehi as a main character and they would like to see him as one of the main characters. And so that was quite a big revision. So that took me probably a couple months to work on. And so I resubmitted the book, and then more months went by, and I thought, well, they asked me for this revision. That means they're interested at least. And then I got another message from them several months later and just said they decided not to publish my book, but good luck, all that stuff. And I just was thinking, okay, now what do I do? Because back then, self-publishing was not a very viable option. We didn't have Amazon. We didn't have online shopping really at all. And so to self-publish, you had to pay for your print run, and then you had to try to sell it at I don't know, a city fair during the summer at a booth or something. So it was very difficult to self-publish and very expensive. And I remember talking to my husband and just telling him, well, I guess this is another throwaway book. And he said, and he at the time he was working in software sales, and he said, in my industry, when our client turns down our offer, that's when we know we need to go in there and we need to, fight for it. I'm like, well, you don't do that in publishing. Like, you don't go into the publisher's office and probably, call the cops on you or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So he just, and he just kept telling me all these different stories, experiences he had. So I thought, okay, fine. I will email them and see if they'll meet with me, which of course terrified me. And I was just hoping they would say no. But they said yes. And so I went and I met with the managing editor. And in the meantime, I had written up like a marketing plan, and I had written up just, kind of like the pitch of the book and who I think the readership would be. And just, I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know if I can even find it anymore. But I went in and I talked to the managing editor, and I just remember her being really nice to me. But you know how there's people that are just really nice and you're thinking, are they really nice, or are they secretly laughing at you, or just thinking, oh, this poor little author, she's such a sweet, bless her heart kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
So, and I had no idea how to read her because I had never met her before, and I didn't know her. So I went home just not really feeling like, I felt like I had made my case at least. And my husband, could stop bugging me about it. And I could say, hey, I went and I met with him like you thought I should. And about a week went by, and I got a phone call. And I remember it very clearly because I was watching some of the neighbor kids with my kids. So there's always 4 and 5-year-olds running around my house, the noise. And so I stepped out in the garage when I realized it was Covenant calling me, and it was cold. It was winter. It was cold. The garage was freezing, and I had bare feet, and I just stand there on the top step with cold feet. And they told me they had changed their minds. And I had this like I just couldn't believe it, because I knew that this was really a phone call that was going to change my life. And I didn't know how much at the time, but I just had been writing enough. I had enough manuscripts rejected and enough that I had given up on, because this was technically my 4th book I had written. So other manuscripts I had given up on for different reasons. And I knew this was kind of the end of the road for me. If they had turned it down, then I'd have to try to find something else to write. Because back then we couldn't have afforded doing self-publishing. And I didn't really want to self-publish, and now I do self-publish. So this was just, at the time, I didn't want to self-publish because the whole point of the story was to get it into bookstores where readers would find it. And I just didn't have the connections to do that. And so they just having, I don't know, just that chain of events brought me to the point of getting a book published, and I was so grateful, and it was very exciting, and I just learned so much, because the first thing the editor told me when he went through and was giving me the feedback is he said, and I can't remember exactly, I think I had 7 or 8 point of view characters in there, which is probably okay for like a giant fantasy, but this was like a 250 page historical novel. And he said, you need to whittle it down to maybe 3 or 4. So I went down, I think, to 4, and that was kind of a big rewrite as well, because there are scenes where you have to decide, am I going to keep the scene? And if I do, can I just swap the point of view? I mean, obviously it's still rewriting, but you're not losing everything.
Right.
So I got it turned in, and meanwhile, I had my 4th baby that early summer, and the book was coming out in the fall. And back then, this was 2004, so it dates me a little bit, is Covenant. They would have the authors do 2 to 3 book signings at Siegel Book on Saturdays for about 6 to 8 weeks, which is great because you want to get out there, especially as a new author. But you're going from store to store, and my kids were little enough, so we didn't have Saturday conflicts. Like if you have kids as they get older, they're going to have band practice, or they're going to have, a soccer game or something. So we're all loaded in my van. I was nursing my baby, and my husband would drive me to the book signing and drop me off, and he'd go find something to do with the kids and then come pick me up or nurse the baby and then go to the next signing. And so we did that for like week after week. And I remember people saying, oh, this is the first book in a series. And I said, yes, because book 1, I hadn't like planned out the whole series, but book 1 took them to, I'm trying to remember even when it went to, I think it took them to when they're about to build the ship, somewhere in there. And so of course we got to have another book so they can build the ship. And I was just saying, oh yeah, the next book. Yeah, I haven't written it, but it'll come out maybe next year. And I thought I should probably email my publisher and ask them if I want my book to come out a year from now, because I knew enough. I wasn't totally naive on everything, but I knew enough that with a series, it's usually like a book a year. And that's kind of how you keep the momentum going with the series. And so I said, if I want this book to come out next fall, when do I need to turn the book in? And this was like probably the 3rd week of September. And they said December 1st. And that's crazy, because that's like all of October, all of November. But that's not just writing. That's having the book good enough to be accepted, because I have written several books that were not good enough to be accepted. So I didn't want to go backwards. And so I was thinking, I don't know how am I going to do this, but this is a chance that not a lot of people, a lot of authors are being given right now. I need to take it. So I definitely turned to prayer. That was something I really needed to think. This is outside of my mortal strength. I don't know how to do this. How am I going to write a book that would be good enough to be accepted and then be the next in the series? And the intimidation of just writing a book knowing that this page might actually be a final page in a book. Because previously, when I was writing my other books, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like you're just hoping and dreaming and always editing and just never like feeling that I guess not, I don't know if it's intense pressure, but it's definitely a pressure to make sure this book is going to be publishable. So I had remembered through like praying and trying to figure out how am I going to do this? I have 4 little kids. My oldest, I think he was about 9 and had the baby at home, and the 2 in between. And my husband at the time, he was working for a company where he traveled a lot. So theoretically I knew put the kids to bed and then I could work at night, but I'm like a morning person. So by the time the kids are in bed, I'm basically ready for bed too. So I had remembered reading this book, and I was a big Mary Higgins Clark mystery reader growing up as a teenager. And I came across a memoir of hers several years before this called Kitchen Privileges. And in it, she talked about how she had been widowed when I think she had 3 or 4 children, and she had to go back to work full time, but she had always wanted to be a writer. So she would write from 4 to 7 in the morning and then get her kids up off to school, and then she would go to work the rest of the day. And I was like, well, if Mary can do it, I can do it. And so that's what I did. Is I wrote from 4 to 7 in the morning for the next 6 or 7 weeks and got that first draft done. And sometimes my nursing baby was up with me, and some days it didn't happen. There's some days things, of course, fall apart. Kids are sick in the middle of the night. And so, but that's how I got that first draft done. And I had some readers that I put on alert, said, hey, I'm going to be sending you this book to read, and I just need a really fast turnover so I can get it submitted to my publisher. So I made the deadline, and I learned, first of all, that with the Lord's help, you really can accomplish something very hard, even though you feel like there's a lot of things stacked against you. The second thing I learned is that I need to come out of my little introverted box and communicate more and find out things like deadlines and find out and be more educated in the publishing industry, and not just, find out things by accident, but try to be more intentional about where I want my career to go and how I want it to look. And so then I knew my deadlines in advance. I was starting. And so I usually start a book like 6 months in advance. And even if it takes me 3 or 4 months to write, it's giving me that kind of buffer time in case, there is an emergency that comes up, or there's a health issue or something. And I'm not able to be writing regularly. And also gives you time to get those readers to look at your book and see if there's adjustments you should make so that you can truly turn in your best work to your publisher. So I just was so grateful to have that opportunity, and it was a lot of work, but I was grateful to maybe have the opportunity to really rely on Heavenly Father, rely on prayer in that way that I hadn't maybe before.
What did you have any feelings of inadequacy, or especially when you started to go do book signings? Did you any imposter syndrome or anything like that when you started out?
I don't think I have imposter syndrome in the traditional sense. I think that mine translates into people saying, "Oh, I loved your book," and I don't totally believe them. I think, "Oh, you're just being nice to me."
Okay.
So maybe I think they're the imposter. I mean, yeah.
I think we all do that. Anybody gives you a compliment and it's
like, well, thank
oh,
you.
they don't really know.
Yeah, it does make you feel good, and it makes you grateful. But also you think, well, maybe they're just being nice because they're seeing me in person. But I also don't think that I think my books are good, but good for what they are. But whenever I read another book, especially literary fiction, I'm just the language is so beautiful. I'm not that person. I'm not that writer. And so I have to just know that going into it.
But that doesn't mean you can't enjoy the book, right? Just because it doesn't have all the beautiful language, you can still enjoy the book,
Yeah.
get into the story, and be caught up in it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when I read a book, I put my own experiences into it. So then I take out things that are personal to me. And I think that's other readers will do that. So a reader might say, "Oh, I love this book." And it's because they connected and it helped them maybe see something in a new light or just validated something. And so that's why they're saying it. They're not really saying, your prose was just the most outstanding, words or description I've ever read. They're not really saying that.
Yeah. What was the name of that book series?
So my first book series is called Out of Jerusalem, and it ended up being 4 books, and it took Nephi's family from Jerusalem to the Promised Land. And the first book, the subtitle was Of Goodly Parents. And it was actually under H.B. Moore was my name. I write biblical fiction or scripture fiction.
Okay. So now you finished this series. Now you've written 7 or 8 books total, right? Because you had those first 3 that didn't go anywhere, but then you wrote the series. So where did you go from there?
So I continued to write Book of Mormon fiction. I wrote Abinadi, Alma the Younger, and then I did Daughters of Jared. And for some reason, my Daughters of Jared book just didn't sell very well. And I think it's one of my favorite Book of Mormon stories I've written, but I felt like because it kind of was going down this slide that I should try something a little bit different. So I started writing biblical fiction. And in the meantime, I wrote a thriller series that actually has a religious undertone as well with another publisher. And then in 2012, I think it was, when I had a couple friends that were doing a lot of self-publishing, I decided to start self-publishing romance anthologies and just kind of other types of like sweet romance, sweet contemporary romance, and sweet historical romance. And then in I think it's 2018 or 2019, Shadow Mountain approached me to write general historical fiction. So now I have a few books out with Shadow Mountain, and I have 3 World War II novels and a Cold War novel, and then some other in-betweeners.
How do
So
you?
did you go back to that first one and like rewrite it? Is that one of the?
So I did, not the very first one. I did rewrite
Okay.
one of my very early books, probably the second book I wrote. And that was my self-publishing experiment book. So I did the uploading with, the formatting, and I was hiring out formatters, but I was like doing every stage with the audio and the cover design and stuff, and kind of learning how to manage all that.
Awesome.
And how do you research for those type of books? Like what's the process to make sure it's accurate?
Yeah, there are some that are, a couple of my books are biographical fiction. So that means there's no fictional characters or fictional events in the book. And those books they're a little bit of a slower read because it's just the real story of this real person. But I'll go and find biographies, like the most well-respected biographies, and I'll also just find anything that like covers the history of that specific era, because I like to like also, especially like with World War II, because you can follow like a single person's story, but there's so much going on in the world that you also want to kind of bring in what was your character's reaction when they maybe found out some of these news items as they were dealing with other things. For instance, when I wrote my book, it's called The Slow March of Light, and it's set mostly in East Germany, and it takes place during the early 60s when the Berlin Wall went up. And so I felt like just to write kind of the slice of history, I needed to understand the history of the occupation of Germany by the Allies and how they split it up. And so I would just find documentaries or go to like YouTube or Amazon Prime or anywhere I can find like a documentary on the Cold War and watch and take notes. And then if I could find, there's actually this book, it's called Checkpoint Charlie. It's really interesting. So the American checkpoint that is in East Berlin, it bordered the American quadrant, but then goes into the Soviet occupied territory. But this book is just about what happened at this checkpoint over the entire Cold War, starting in the 40s. Well, and then, it wasn't really an official checkpoint until the wall went up, but it was still, there was still like a border there. So they still had to, get people through this border. Anyway, so it's just really interesting just have one book just on this one checkpoint.
That's awesome.
Okay. So, and then you've obviously continued to write and self-publish since you started self-publishing, but you have worked with publishers too, right? So you're kind of doing both.
Yeah. So I still write for Shadow Mountain, and my last book with Covenant came out in 2024, and then they've kind of changed what they're asking for. And so a book I had turned into Covenant on Elizabeth and Zacharias, I ended up self-publishing that one. And then I also I've written some like sports romances with 2 author friends, Rebekah Connolly and Jen Geigel Johnson. And we did for years, we did these sports romances together, and we just sold those to a UK publisher. So they're going to recover them and kind of spread them out more into the market. So there's always something going on.
All right. Well, and so one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast today is because you recently won a Praiseworthy Award at LDSPMA for your book, Rebekah and Isaac.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah. So that was my book. That one came out 2024 with Covenant. And it was an interesting book to write because I was trying to find like a story where there was like a story of faith, a story of sacrifice, a story of faith, which of course happens with Rebekah and Isaac, because Rebekah leaves. She has to go just completely on faith to leave her homeland and go marry a man she's never met. And Isaac, we know he has a great story of faith. But I had kind of a hang up because when I was doing research on the whole family, including Abraham and Sarah, I guess we call her Sarah now. So when I first started doing research on the whole family, I just did not like Abraham, because the more I learned about him and the more I studied the decisions he made, I was thinking, I don't know, it's hard when you're studying an ancient culture and ancient traditions with like a modern mind, because you just want to like wring their necks and say, why did you do that? Or that is so wrong. Or anyway, so my hang up was that he sent Hagar away with Ishmael. And I just couldn't understand, why would you send Hagar was his wife. I know that she was given to him by Sarah, but it's still your wife. Like, why don't you stand up for her, or at least set her up in a camp someplace? And Ishmael is your son. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I met with Dr. Kerry Milstein at BYU because he is an expertise on Abraham. I said, you have to talk me off the ledge here, because I'm trying to write a book about this revered patriarch, but I don't revere him. So help me out. And it's really interesting. He like explained to me a few things. And then he also had this book that had just had come out around that same time when I was researching, called From Creation to Sinai. And it's a really big book, and it has like different articles and essays from all these different scholars that are talking about exactly what I was trying to figure out. And long story short is I realized that, first of all, Abraham knew that this is the right thing to do, even though Sarah was kind of the one saying she's got to go. And Abraham knew that in order for Ishmael to become his own tribal leader and to have his own sons and to eventually would be, his own kind of dynasty, he couldn't do it under Abraham, because Isaac was a birthright. And so Ishmael had to separate from the tribe. And then he had this amazing leadership himself. And so it was, and the other thing about Hagar, my thing about Hagar is that because she had come as a handmaiden, it meant that she had probably been purchased through the slave trade. And usually when you are done with the slave, you sell them back. And so for Sarah and Abraham to say, no, we're not selling you back, you can now go and be the matriarch of your son's tribe, that was actually very kind. And where I was looking at as very negative, it was actually a very positive thing. So
yeah, it's interesting because when you do look into history, we can't walk in their shoes, right? And we don't know everything that happened back then. So you do the best you can to get the context, but sometimes you miss it. Yeah.
And there are those cultural things that we just don't understand, because ours is so different.
It's true. Like, we feel like I would never let that happen, or I would go and say this, but they didn't even have that thought at all, like we do.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So, what advice would you have for upcoming writers that are just getting started? maybe something that could help them to overcome some of the obstacles that they might face?
So what has helped me is kind of set my own personal goals, like whether it's writing 500 words a day, 5 days a week, or getting some sort of writer journal and doing stickers or some sort of reward. I can go out to lunch, if I hit my goals for a month or something. But just find something that is kind of personal to you to help motivate you, because it's one thing that's very hard about being a writer is it takes a long time to write a book. It can take a really long time to get published, and then a long time to get paid. And so your spouse or your friend or your child is like, okay, it's been like 3 years. And so you have to like find a way to keep yourself motivated. But also just approach publishing professionally, meet your deadlines when of course possible, and be nice in the sandbox, because publishing world is very small, and there's a lot of writers. A lot of writers have egos, or if not egos, then at least a lot of emotions. And so you just need to play nice and be kind, like you do with everything else in life. Everybody has their own struggles with whatever they're doing. You might see a friend of yours win an award, or you might see them get a contract, and you just celebrate with them, because maybe you'll be next and maybe you won't, but we've all have been kind of fighting the same fight. And so it's good to just lift each other up and don't resent each other. Another thing I would just say is make it purposeful. And maybe your journey is going to be different than someone else's journey, and that's okay. Maybe your journey is writing articles and inspiring just those handful of people that really needed to read what you write. Maybe it's writing something really cool, like a fantasy series, and you can go speak at school assemblies and inspire kids to follow their dreams. Like, we're all going to have different impacts in different ways.
So true.
And how would you, what advice would you give about when they do hit a failure or a roadblock? What's the best way to overcome that?
So I think you just have to look at it as, a lot of times when you hit a failure in publishing, it's really a business decision, and it's not personal. And it's easy to kind of say that just off the cuff, but sometimes it's just about numbers, or it just, maybe the editor's having a bad day. Like, you just don't know all the time. But I really believe that if, a door closes, a window opens, I really believe that, because there are so many choices right now, especially with self-publishing. I've had some really, really hard rejections. But then I turned that into a blessing, thinking I can self-publish. I know how to self-publish. I've been doing it for a long time. So even though I would have loved to have this book with this publisher or in this system, I can still get this book out maybe in a different way. And so just know that it's not if you get published anymore, it's when you get published and how you want to do it. And for example, with my Elizabeth and Zacharias book, I was able to just kind of take my time, and I had like a map done for the book, and I had some really cool stuff done for the book that I maybe normally wouldn't have if I was working with a publisher that had kind of just a set budget, that they're not going to move from, because they can only do so much for one book because they have to stay within their budget.
Right. That makes sense. Well, this has been awesome, Heather. Thanks so much for sharing some of your experiences and highs, lows, wins, losses.
They continue.
Yeah. So what's next?
So I have it's a nonfiction book on 8 women who transformed America that's coming out in August. It's called Her America. And so that's my next. So we're just kind of in the very final edits right now with that book.
That's awesome. I'm excited for that one. Sounds good.
Crossing fingers, it'll be okay for the readers.
Yeah, great. Well, as we kind of wrap up, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just say, don't give up. If you want to get published, don't give up. Just follow your heart is totally possible to achieve your dreams. Stay creative, stay close to the Lord. And I think creativity and writing is definitely a gift that we can cultivate in many, many ways.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like we all have gifts, and the way we improve those gifts is to keep working at them.
Yep.
Right. And I'm sure you feel like you're a much better writer now than when you started 20 years ago.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's great. Well, thanks so much, Heather. Darla, any last thoughts or questions you have?
No, I just say good luck, everyone. You can find me on social media. I'm happy to ask questions if you're starting out and you just have questions that, just need someone to use as a soundboard. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. I was really interested in everything that you had to say. Now I wrote down the books because I want to go and get them now and read them. I'm so excited.
Awesome.
She is a big reader. She's constantly reading. So
I love reading too.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I do a lot of audio. Like I'll even, I love the Libby app. I don't know if you've heard of that, or Bookshelf Plus, which is run by Desert Book, where you can Libby is from the library, so it's just an app, and you can get ebooks or audiobooks. So that definitely helps cut the budget a little.
Yeah, I know it can get expensive. Yeah.
If we had to choose between food or buying books, Darla, which one would you pick?
That one's hard.
Well,
I don't know.
I
might go on a diet.
All right. Well, thanks, Heather, so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. And everyone, let's go and share Heather's story. Make sure you hit that share button, and let's do our 5-second missionary work. And if you guys have any questions or comments you'd like Heather to answer, make sure you go put those in the comments so she can see those. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, go to latterdaylights.com or email us at latterdaylights@gmail.com. So thanks again, Heather. Thanks, Darla, for hanging out, my co-host. And we will talk to you guys next week with another episode of Latter Day Lights. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.